Okay. Can you tell us your name, your year at the university, and how you got involved with Who's Diversity?
Okay. My name is Joanna. I am a fourth year student in the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies department. And I got involved in Who's Diversity when it first initiated. A good friend of mine started talking to me about some of the issues that she had experienced, and we started talking about some of the things that I had also experienced. And so we developed an email that she sent out to all her contacts, asking people questions like, are you tired of this and that, or have you experienced this? And then we started circulating that email, and we had maybe 25 people show up to that meeting, or 30 people. And from there we started talking about kind of what we had seen at the university and what we might want to do to start enacting change. So that's how I got started.
Can you tell us a little bit about those initial questions of how people came together?
The questions that we asked?
Yes.
I can pull up an email, but they were questions like, are you tired of being in a classroom and the professor pointing you out as like the voice for your entire community? Like, as a Mexican woman, would you mind talking about your experience with sexism? Or questions that made you really uncomfortable like that. Mostly questions about being a person of color at a primarily white university were some of the questions that we asked. And then we also asked questions about policing, like, are you tired of reading crime reports on campus that single you out or single out people that you love and know? Are you tired of seeing the spaces that you care about at this university taken away? Things like that. So
okay.
It was like a whole bunch of questions.
All right. So can you tell us a little bit about the role you played in Who's Diversity and what goals you hope to accomplish in organizing?
So Who's Diversity doesn't really have like a hierarchical structure, or didn't have a hierarchical structure. So from the beginning we said it was a collective, and that it was going to be a collective of folks, both students and non-students, who are interested in doing this work, but not as a student organization. So it was an autonomous organization from the university, and we spread out the work among ourselves. Most of our documents that are on our website and that we ever circulated were collectively written. So there's not like really like some person who like primarily authored a document unless we say that, but for the most part, that's not the case. So I helped with organizing events. I helped with working on some of the documents. I was one of the people who gathered what people's ideas were for demands and wrote them up. So we would have discussions during our meetings about what things we wanted to address, and then I would draft up the demands, and then we'd circulate them and people would edit them. And that's kind of how we came up with our list of demands. We also held several events. Like Ken talked about an event that we had where we were sharing testimonies as students, historically marginalized students on campus, and that event was a major event that also helped us kind of like understand what kind of vision we wanted for our organization in terms of like what were the experiences of historically marginalized students on campus.
Okay. Also, Kim and Irina, members of Who's Diversity, talked a little bit about one of the issues that was raised in Who's Diversity was the crime alerts, or concerns with crime alerts. And so can you talk a little bit about in more detail about the concerns for crime reports or crime alerts at the university and what those do to culture on campus?
So the major thing that kind of set us off as Who's Diversity is that in 2013, there was a report or an alert, of a armed robbery that happened on campus. So one of the buildings on the West Bank had an armed robbery where they took somebody's laptop and they published a picture, which is not very common. Normally they don't really publish pictures, they just give like really generic information, but they published a picture of a person, and it wasn't even the correct person, but of course it was a black male. And in the picture that they started circulating, it showed somebody, and then they later had to like say like, we apologize, the picture that we circulated was not the actual suspect, and that person was a graduate student who was an immigrant, and he was going to be traveling out of the country, so like his whole livelihood was basically put at risk because of this image. So it's like, that's one story that happened, but after that event, the whole campus was talking about how we need to have more security on campus. So before, our buildings were not locked in the way that they are now. Like now, the Ford building, for example, where my department is, you have to have a key on the weekends. You have to have a key after a certain hour in order to get in. That didn't used to be the case. So after this armed robbery, they're like talking about how we need to secure the campus. They lobbied and asked for money, and the board of regents allocated all this funding, like millions of dollars, in order to secure our campus. And like, what we wanted to push back on was, one, the idea that the campus wasn't safe because there were black men on campus or people of color, but also that our buildings would be more safe if they were locked, you know? So it's just really fucking problematic the way that the whole logic was like even built around that. And really, like, to know that all of these like vague alerts are being circulated where like they don't even really specify, and now they're becoming more specific after they became more specific after we like started critiquing them. But initially, like, people wanted more crime alerts, people wanted more police on campus, people wanted more buildings locked up, because they wanted to feel safe on campus. And or so they say, safe. And our question was like, who gets to feel safe on this campus? Like, who feels safe with more police presence on this campus? Who feels safe with the police walking around the library kicking people out, which is another story that we heard of people getting kicked out. Like, also the university is like on the university is neighbors, like a huge like Somali neighborhood, right? So there were stories we also heard about Somali students being kicked out of the library because they were told they didn't look like students. So again, like, it just creates a climate or creates an environment and experiences of like extreme racism on campus at the hands of the police, but also at the hands of other students who feel like they have the right to police who gets to be on campus and who can't be on campus.
Okay. And so do you have any suggestions as an individual or as someone who is part of Who's Diversity of some of the ways that we can address these issues of policing and are creating an unjust environment on campus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I want to push like more than just that environment. It's like real experiences that people are having, you know, like life-threatening experiences. But like when we started speaking about this, like, we wanted the crime alerts to be entirely eliminated so that we didn't get those emails, and especially not vague information. And so there's this Clery Act that mandates that the police on campus report any like crime that happens. But in other universities, like for example, I don't know if this is the case at UNLV anymore, but when I was at UNLV, the way that the police circulated that information was through the student newspaper. So they had like a small column in the newspaper that said like, these are some of the crimes that have occurred on campus. Whereas here, like, we get constant emails about these kinds of things. So we had said like, we wanted to do away entirely with the emails, and we want no information around the race of the person, because we feel like that's unnecessary to include. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we wanted to address like the safety of all students. So for example, we feel like it's unsafe for students to have to enter restrooms that are labeled male or female when they might be gender non-conforming or transgender. That puts the safety of those students at risk. But we have a climate, or we have our campus is not does not have restrooms that that folks can enter that are gender neutral. So again, like issues that would actually create a space that would be comfortable and safe for students who have been historically marginalized on campus. So there are other ways, like a ton of ways that we address that on campus, but like to actually think about who is not safe on this campus. And historically it hasn't been white people, it's been people of color and gender non-conforming people and queer people who have not been safe, you know?
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.